Excellent. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to JWA's Book Talks. I'm Judith Rosenbaum of the Jewish Women's Archive. So happy to gather with all of you tonight. It's been quite a week. Please say hello in the chat box. Make sure to chat to everyone. We love to know who's with us in the room. Also, please add your questions there, and we'll try to bring them in later in the program. A few words about JWA for anyone who is new to us. We are a digital archive. We expand and transform the way that we understand history and Jewish culture by documenting and sharing Jewish women's stories. We also pay special attention to how gender functions in the past and present. And we do all of this because we believe that uncovering a more diverse and nuanced story helps create a better world. And you are all our partners in doing that, so thank you very much. These book talks are just one aspect of JWA's work. I hope you will explore our digital archive at jwa.org to get a sense of the full range of projects and resources that we offer. There is so much there. A very quick logistical note. Sorry, I'm a little distracted by my own glasses because I can see lights reflecting in them. I'm finally at the point where I have to wear them on screen and I hate it. If you would like captions, you click the button that says CC or show captions. That should turn them on for you. We can't turn them on, but that should be there for you. Okay, on to the actual purpose of our gathering here tonight. I am so delighted to welcome back to JWA our featured author for this evening. Maira Kalman is an author, illustrator, and designer. She has written and or illustrated more than 30 books for adults and children, many of which are in a stack by the side of my desk right now. She's been a frequent contributor to The New Yorker, most notably the New Yorkistan cover and the New York Times. She has created textiles for Isaac Mizrahi, sets for Mark Morris and David Byrne, dance collaborations with John Higginbotham. Her work has been exhibited in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I saw Sarah Berman's closet there myself, and I'm sure many of you did too. The ICA in Philadelphia, National Museum of American Jewish Heritage, the Jewish Museum of New York. She was last with JWA for a book talk way back in 2020 on her illustrated version of Gertrude Stein's The Autobiography of Alice B. Toklas. Maira is currently working on two books, one called Joy and the other called Trees, and I hope we'll get to hear a little more about that later. But tonight, our main event is to talk about her most recent book, Still Life with Remorse. Welcome, Maira. So glad to have you back with us. Oh, you're muted.
There we go.
Yay.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. And welcome to everyone who is coming in. Thank you all for introducing yourselves in the chat. It's great to see who's here with us. I see we've got lots of devoted fans. Okay, so I have some images to show, and I know that you like to start with an image actually that is not one of your own, but one of your mother's. So I'm going to share my screen so that you can talk about that. And I think I might need to actually hit play on this. Hold on a second. Hold on a second. There we go. Is that right? There we go. Okay. Are people seeing that?
Great. This, I'm sure a number of you have seen this map, so you'll forgive me for showing it, but I always start every talk I give with this incredible work that my mother did when I was asking people to make maps of the United States for when I was doing the New York Times column on the pursuit of happiness. Everybody did a very earnest attempt at drawing the map of the United States. But my mother sat down and did this. So, I mean, I'm sure that people are laughing, or hopefully people are laughing in their own very own home, their cozy homes. But clearly it's a map that's half deranged, half full of humor, half unapologetically ignorant. All of the attributes of an artist in a way, that the kind of, and though she wasn't an artist, but that sense of having an original idea that you carry through in a most wonderful way and not having to get anything right at all. She has Canada in the right place. That's about it. But other than that, we're completely lost.
I love
And
how Tel Aviv is at the bottom right
yeah,
there.
she's got television. She got Lenin, the little village in Belarus that she came from, and Jerusalem is there too. But we see Hawaii and Florida on the East Coast, and Alaska on the West Coast, and Texas and California underneath Canada. So it's all complete mayhem. And it's like a Marx Brothers comedy. And I have it on my wall because every time you become too earnest or try too serious or think you have an obligation to be correct, then look at this map and then you can be free.
It's also such an interesting reminder that like we all are, I mean, it's such a um concretization of the fact that we all are coming from our own location and everything we see is based on how we situate ourselves in relationship to other things, and it's completely different for every person, and it's such a humbling
Yeah,
reminder, right?
yeah.
That like all we can know is the way that we are seeing things for ourselves, and the way someone else sees things is going to be like wacky no matter what. Which I think, I think I can imagine is a good, I'm thinking about like wanting to start every talk with this. And in some ways, it's like, it's a reminder like we can all only speak from the way we see our things ourselves.
And that keeps changing. That also that sense of the what's also going on this map is the sense of dislocation and bringing in her past and bringing in not knowing. It's a tremendous ode to the impermanence of things and the confusion that we all have about so many things in the world that can never be answered. We will be perpetually confused, and sometimes it'll be funny,
Right.
sometimes not. So there, we hope for funny, but it doesn't always come.
Right. And it also, and I think when you showed this in our last talk, I said this too, but I'll say it again. It reminds me of the New Yorker cover of like a New Yorker's view of the world, where it's like the farthest reach you can see is like New Jersey, right? And
Right.
everything else is like very large.
Yeah, the
And
Steinberg cover, which she doesn't, she didn't know, which is wonderful to know that she didn't know about it. But yes, it's very much in that spirit. And he also, he came from Romania and was an immigrant and didn't belong in that way and had this wonderful comic view of the world,
right.
tragic comic.
But it's also, to me, it's always an image that's about a certain kind of provincialism, and that like even the people who think they are the most worldly are provincial in their own ways.
Right.
So in your book, your newest book, there are so many different things going on, which this is making me think of all the pieces that would be in your own map of that book, which are um, family stories and still life paintings and stories of artists and paintings of artists and all kinds of pieces that come together. Where did it start for you?
Well, it started with women holding things. And I think that in the ideal world, we're not sure how that happens, but one thing leads to another. And there is a kind of organic navigation that you do in the world. And so when I was finished with Women Holding Things, which was somewhat melancholy, but also somewhat optimistic and full of love and full of sorrow as everything is. And then I thought, well, I guess I'm focusing more, I'm hearing more about remorse. I'm tuned in more to remorse. And then I thought, okay, that would probably be a good next step after Women Holding Things, because we all carry so much remorse. And we wonder, and every day one wonders why. What is that? What is the function of that? And how do you get rid of it? So I just felt that Still Life with Remorse was a way to talk about what I was thinking about in the world. And I think, also getting older and looking back and saying, okay, what did I do right and what did I do wrong? And the things that I did wrong, why were they happening? Why did I do that as opposed to that? Why was I unkind as opposed to kind? So those are all the questions that I was asking myself. But when you say to somebody you're working on remorse, everybody goes, oh my God, I have more remorse than anybody on earth. And everybody thinks that they have the lock on remorse, which is interesting. Not
Right.
everybody, but a lot of people.
That is interesting. I will say that um, I I think one of the things that I loved most about Women Holding Things is just and this is true of all your books, but I think it was, at least for me, it felt particularly shown through in that project. Just a sense of like, uh, can't even think of what the right word is, just recognizing and naming what is happening for so many women that is it's exactly the things that are unspoken, all the things that women hold that are invisible, that are, these invisible burdens and sometimes gifts that don't get named. And so naming that felt and picturing it felt so powerful, even if it was small things.
Right.
But then also big things. And I guess remorse is another one of those invisible pieces of luggage that we all carry around.
And and there's so many questions that come from that. Like, what could you have done something differently? That perpetual question, could I have done something differently? Well, you could have, but you didn't. So that's the story. That's your history, and you have to accept that. And does it make you a better person to recognize how what remorse you have? And I think actually probably not, because I have no idea what I'm doing right now that I'm going to look back on and go, oh, how could I have been so foolish or so thoughtless? So it's a constant state, and I guess I don't know what the antidote is. The antidote is painting. That's what the antidote is, just or taking a walk, or like somehow forgiving yourself for all of the dastardly things that you've done in your life.
Well, actually, what you say at the end is the answer, or that you suggest, is singing, actually.
Yeah,
And I
I
was
think
curious if that's your approach, if you're a singer, if you sing to get the remorse off out of your throat.
I think that anything other than talking is a good technique, whether it's walking or talking to a dog or singing or dancing. That sense of, when words fail and when emotions can't be figured out, then just, sing. You usually can't be that sad when you're singing, I think. I always thought you couldn't be sad when you were having a delicious meal. Like it would be impossible to be sad if you were at a fabulous restaurant.
Hmm.
Well, I think that's, I've had some fights in fabulous restaurants. So
I think it's impossible to taste the goodness of good food if you're not if you're not in a place of enjoyment.
yeah, you can't be having a giant fight and say, oh my God, this souffle is superb.
Right. I've definitely had experiences of not enjoying a wonderful meal because I was having other feelings. But so I guess the talking cure is not your approach. You're not a
Mm,
believer in the talking
It's
cure.
it's good to have people who you can talk to and you can say all kinds of stupid things and they forgive you for it. You kind of have to know who you're talking to.
Hmm.
Not that many people that you can do that with, but hopefully you have a few.
So, do you want to give us a little taste of some of the pieces in the book?
Sure. I'm going to read Uncle, which is a story. So there are stories about Clara Schumann and stories about Kafka, and then stories about my family. Um, all of them kind of intertwined in a sense of these are my people. So this is Uncle. Once our uncle sat in a gigantic black inner tube and floated in the sea. He fell asleep and drifted farther and farther from the shore. He was a tiny dot in the sea. People went out in a boat to rescue him. He could have been swept out to sea, but he was not. But he could have. And this is what we call the possible probable remorse tense, suffering after the fact over a disaster that could possibly have happened but did not. This tense occurs very frequently in our household, daily, even hourly. And it's extraordinary how much suffering we have over things that haven't happened. It's like, I don't know
Yeah.
what percentage of life that is, but it's not an insignificant percentage. So, and that kind of, having escaped some kind of horrific, horrific end, it just seems like it's constantly there. The danger.
There, I
That's
want to say,
fun.
that I feel, but I'm a little scared to say this, but I feel like there's something maybe slightly Jewish about that problem.
I think it might be very Jewish about that problem, but I think that I do believe that a lot of people have that, but maybe it's more, I always say that it's about the danger that Jews have always been in, the displacement, the being flung from here and flung from there, for being an perpetual outsider, no matter what you do, that sense that somewhere, somehow you don't belong. And that's a wonderful, I mean, not belonging is a wonderful thing. And probably in the end, nobody belongs anywhere. But I think that, and definitely that kind of evil eye, all of those things, the dread of something wretched happening. Yeah, it's,
Right.
I think it's very Jewish.
Yeah. But it's almost like it's easier to focus on the things that didn't happen than the things that did happen. I don't know. There's something strange about it in some ways. Like one
Right.
could imagine survival leading to a sense of invincibility or um, a different kind of resilience, a resilience that's less backward looking at like, oh my God, we almost didn't survive or something.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, is it easier? I don't know. It's a perpetual anxiety in that level. I don't mean to say that I live in that state 24/7, but it's a thing. It's a real
Right.
thing. And so, I always wonder whether the anxiety that I have when I'm beginning a project and I'm not sure I don't know whether it's going to be good or whether it's going to be interesting. And that sense of, I used to think, oh, if only I could get rid of the anxiety. And now I think, no, I probably need it. It's probably part of the process to allow some kind of emotion to fuel through the body or the system or the mind. And somehow that that propels you into doing your work. So, because again, another antidote to anxiety is just doing your work.
Right. Right. Maybe we should take a step back and talk a little bit about what you mean by remorse or how you're thinking about remorse.
Well, I have a glib answer to that, which is, we compare regret and remorse. So regret, you could say, which is, we use that a lot. Regret is, I'm sorry I burnt the roast. And remorse is, I'm sorry I ruined your life. So, the 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 intensity of the second one is obviously something that is to more or less degrees part of everybody's story. And I don't know why. I don't know why. Guilt, sorrow. I don't know why we have, well, I don't know why we have anything.
But
So we're
I,
alive.
I think it also requires um, the ability to distinguish between those two levels of experience. And I think sometimes that can be hard for some people or for all people at some times, right? Like to distinguish the difference between what ruins somebody's life versus what is ruining a particular thing or moment. And so I wonder if there's a piece of that too, sort of like how do we assess that? Like what is a true tragedy versus what is just like an unfortunate thing that happened or
Right. Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, the perspective, as somebody said, I see a question popped up, is it, about blame? And I think that, yeah, and all you can do is somehow try to find a balance in whatever that is between, the intense guilt and blame, and then saying, well, I don't know what, I did the best I could. I don't think everybody can say they did the best they could, but let's say I do. And then you just have to shed it. You have to, I don't know, anyway, until it comes back again. It's a kind of letting go of everything and just not, just emptying your brain or whatever that, however you do that. I don't know. I don't know how you,
Mhm.
I mean, I do know how you do it, but
Yeah. I mean, and I think the question is also, are we talking about blame of oneself or blame of other people?
well,
Right?
if you have remorse, it's usually, I would say from my point of view, it's blame yourself.
Right.
Then if you find a way out to blame the other person, then good for you.
Well, there can be remorse around the way relationships unfold, which could
Well,
involve
that's, you could have remorse about everything.
right, right. So in some ways, you're saying remorse there's a certain scale to it that is different from just the, everyday regret.
Yes, definitely. And it makes me think that I opened the book with a quote from Virgil, which he said, "There are tears in the nature of things." And once you can say, okay, there is an essential sorrow, there's an essential misunderstanding between people, there's a perpetual level of not being able to provide people with what they wish they could get or wish, want, a kind of failure in that. Um, I guess if everybody accepts that, there's a level of, all right, what's for lunch kind of
Right.
thing.
Right. Like the human condition is going to be one of those kinds of misunderstandings or missing the mark. And so it takes down the level of intensity of it then if it's just part of the landscape of human relationships.
Right.
Right.
For some amount of time, because nothing stays, no emotion stays fixed.
Mm.
Every time I'm in a really good mood, I think, wow, first of all, I'm suspicious. But then I think, wow, what if I'm just really in a good mood forever? Well, of course, that doesn't stay. And then I get into a bad mood, and then I think, oh, well, this is going to stay forever. That's for sure. So, somehow we give more credence to, well, I do, to bad moods and to, the darker feelings. But then again, we always say then, some kind of optimism and there, I was reading Kafka's diaries, which, are hilarious, by the way. And he goes through one torment after another, and and then he says, from all of a sudden he feels good. And he says, from whence this optimism? May it last, so he didn't have that many years to have it, but so
So that also brings me to the still life question because um, your your paintings are so bright and joyful in many ways. I mean, they're also poignant and can be sort of have a melancholy expression, but I think that, talking about remorse sounds so dark and heavy, but that is so not the nature of the images that you've
right.
paired with remorse. So how did you come to the idea of still life as being paired with remorse here?
Well, I thought that I couldn't do one painting after another of misery and and uh and sorrow. So I thought, well, what would be interesting to paint? And I, I always look at the objects around us, and I think everything that's around us speaks of our lives, speaks of what's going on. They're in the room. For the most part, you've chosen them, and they have a presence, and they have a real resonance, and they speak. The objects around you really speak. So I also started looking at still lifes, and I thought, well, this would be fabulous to paint, and it would carry me through the idea. It would be, it would not leave me in the lurch. And even though there are a few other paintings there of Tolstoy's family, or of Chekhov dead in bed, as one usually, as one does, that, and there are also musical interludes in the book. So that you can have an idea and stick with it and then break the rule and go off and do something else. But it was nice to come back to still lifes. They're very grounding. They're not threatening. And there is a poignancy in the, I mean, obviously you can't have any sense of beauty without a sense of sorrow. You just cannot. I have to drink some water.
Sure. Um, yeah, I think your book helped me think about still life a little bit differently than I think I had before, which probably just speaks to my own limited thoughts about still life before. But I think I always thought about them mostly either in terms of like formal things like composition or in terms of sort of symbolism. And I think here I was so struck by what they tell us, as you're saying, like about the lives of the people who are not in them. And so then they're both about the presence of people, they're about the people's lives, but also then about the absence of the people,
Right. Right.
and the kind of memories that they hold. And I think about that piece of things a lot as a historian and thinking about like what are the objects that hold the stories that are, um, the stories that are the stuff of life and how those inhere in particular texts or objects or, material culture. But I hadn't necessarily looked at still life quite that way. So that added a whole other perspective and experience of that for me. And the fact also that so many of the still lifes are of domestic spaces also connected to that piece, of sort of the spaces that aren't necessarily seen as like the exalted spaces, but rather the ordinary spaces.
Right. And I mean, for me, I love rooms and I love painting rooms and the idea of looking at the objects I mean, sometimes I painted ornate rooms for different projects, but to me, the most interesting are the simplest, most elemental, objects that catch your eye and kind of stop you in your tracks. And it
Mm.
can be a sink, in somebody's bathroom or a vase of flowers.
So we have a request from Joanne to show some of the images, and I think that's a great idea. I'm gonna move on the slides here, and you can tell us a little bit. We have two more images to show, so you can tell us a
This,
little bit about
should I
these.
read this? I'll read a story with that
Yeah.
painting. Um, sorry if I'm looking for it. I'll search for another second or two. Um, well, you think I'd know where it is. Here it is. It's called Sheets. Hmm. Once a man and a woman were married. She made excellent jams of all kinds, including quince, and she was fastidious. She loved to wash and iron the sheets all the time. To her, it was important to dry them in the fresh air. So she draped them all over the furniture to dry. The man could not sit on the furniture when the sheets were drying, and it made him furious. They fought about it. Why do you have to dry the sheets all over the furniture? I can't sit down. She completely ignored him. She couldn't care less. One day, the woman had draped the sheets over the furniture, and the man was boiling with fury. He yelled at her to no avail, and then he dropped dead. So you could say the laundry killed him. So, and actually, what's funny or not funny is that this is a true story, and that a friend of mine told me this story. Of course, we're laughing. That in our family, there's a story that, I mean, it's a true story that one of the cousins back in Lenin in Belarus was sitting in his shack drinking, and this is in Sarah Berman's closet, and drinking a glass of tea, and a bolt of lightning shot through the window and killed him. And the amount of laughter over that story in our family, not because they're insensitive, well, maybe there is some insensitivity, but just like the how
Yeah.
absurd this whole world is. So that was, I guess, in a way, the man dropping dead of sheets. From the sheets, I find, privately, I'll find hilarious. I could be a little sorry for him, but not really.
And so why did you illustrate that with the quinces?
Because I went to my friend's house and she had a plate of quince, and I thought, there you go. I know the painting for this story.
Hmm. We have a question about whether you like quince soda, which apparently is a thing in Hong Kong.
I've never heard of it.
Me neither. Something to explore. I'm not sure I even have had an actual quince. It's sort of like a pear-ish kind of pear
Yeah,
apple kind
the
of thing.
quince jam is really good.
Right. I've had quince paste, I think.
That's all I know. Right, right, right.
Right. I do make a recipe that calls for quince, but I put an apple in instead. Um, we have
Okay, go ahead.
one more image to show.
Uh, this is a painting I did of a small portion of Cézanne's studio when I went to visit his studio in Aix-en-Provence, and the light in there was so amazing. The walls were gray, and they told me the recipe for the gray, which is fantastic because the whites of the white of the tablecloth just is luminous. Everything was luminous in that room, but especially the whites. So it's kind of going into an exalted space. You don't want to idolize anybody. Everybody's a human being and everybody has all of the stuff of human beings. But but there's something about the focus on all of the things, as you said, the domestic things around you, and from this man who also had a terrible relationship with his wife for as documented, but painted her incessantly.
Mm.
So there's all of the complexity of what those emotions are swirl. For me, standing in that room, those emotions and those stories about the two of them, because I'd done paintings of his wife Hortense, for women holding things, and so it was nice to have this painting here in the Remorse book. Though I
Mm.
don't know if he had remorse, but
Um, Tell us a little bit. I'm going to stop the share if I can do that. Um, so tell us a little bit about the decision to focus on certain artists in this book. Because as we said, there's stories of your family and then there's stories of artists. And actually, interestingly, the people who are pictured are exclusively the artists. You don't have any depictions of family, correct?
right, right. I didn't think I wanted to do that this time, but I really with Clara Schumann and Clara and Robert Schumann, I just decided that I have this delusional ability to feel that I belong in different eras, in different centuries, with groups of people who would never, in a million years have anything to do with me, but that so I could imagine myself with Clara and Robert and Brahms, wandering around that room, and I can imagine myself in the Kafka kitchen with everybody driving everybody crazy, and Franz having a terrible headache or being nauseous. So, and I've done a series of paintings of, as I said earlier, of Chekhov, but of artists being, dead artists, Proust and Tolstoy. So writers and artists. So, I don't have any plan. It's just what hits me. And that's the nice part of this. One of the nice parts of this job is that I can just wake up in the morning and discover an image and go, oh, well, of course that's what I'm going to paint. And I'll figure out a way to use it. I mean, it's not going to be completely unrelated. And if it is unrelated, then I won't be able to use it. But that sense of being open to new imagery and just going, well, that's nice. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
With not much more thought.
In terms of that question of kind of putting yourself in the past, I was really struck by one of the pieces in this collection that you title "Now is Not Enough, I Want the Past," in which you have this fantasy of hanging out with all of these long dead musicians. And I think I particularly love that because that is the um, sort of image that I have of the Jewish Women's Archive. Like I have this sense that all of the women in our archive are hanging out behind the scenes, right? Like I don't really fantasize myself into it, although I would kind of love that. But I have this sense that, like, when my back is turned, they're all just kind of talking, squabbling, dancing, protesting, interacting with each other. And I love the kind of richness and background hum that allows for me. Um, and I guess I was sort of imagining that for you as an artist who is mostly working alone, that like maybe that's similar, that you're inviting these other artists and writers into the room to be part of the kind of low hum of the background.
Right. And also just very practically, I listen to music all day long.
There was a question about whether you listen to music when
Uh,
you.
I listen to music all the time. I think that music is more important than anything. And of any, well, I mean, you could say read literature, but if you had to say that music just somehow propels you into a different space in a different way. And so I listen to classical music. And so I'm hearing these names all the time.
Hmm.
So I'm hearing about Clara and Robert and Brahms and Mendelssohn and all of the people that I'm kind of, well, what would it be like to actually hang out with them? I mean, which people do all the time, imagine that. So I also had gone to a past life psychic,
Hmm.
just as an aside, for kind of a fun experiment, kind of a fun literary experiment. And and so one of them told me that I had been a really good pianist in 19th century Germany. And I thought, oh, Clara Schumann. And then she said, yeah, Clara Schumann and then some. So, I thought it was really quite funny. And
Interesting. And you Wasn't that your first medium?
You mean the
Piano, not the
Oh,
psychic.
I'm sorry. This I
Piano.
was going to say I've gone to no, yes, and because the extension of wanting to make films and do other work. So in this, we've done four films. Where in one I'm Clara Schumann, one I'm Kafka, one I'm Cicero. Those three are in the book, and then Martha Graham. I play Martha Graham, and I dance. She's not in the book, but I saw a film of her dancing Frontier, and I thought, how hard could that be? It's like completely insane. And so there are four films that my son Alex and I are working on now. We're now editing.
Uh-huh.
He's editing them now. And so there's a nice kind of leap out of being alone in the studio and going, oh, let's make a movie.
Well, and you also like, and I remember from our previous conversation, you like to sort of inhabit some of the figures that you're working on. Because I remember that last time we looked at photos of you as Alex B. Toklas.
And then we made a film of that too, which anybody can find on YouTube. It's my name is Alice B. Toklas if somebody's inclined to be amused for 5 minutes. But yeah, so I thought there's this kind of desire to do all kinds of stuff and not just to be in this. There's to be more physical and to make music and to dance and to act. Some badly, but act anyway.
And so, did the musical interludes in the book come from that as well, that sense of the music that you were listening to or the people you were imagining being with?
Yeah, I always, that the sense kind of it's a physical, I think, feeling like you say, oh, enough of this subject. We need a palate cleanser. We need a something. And then and because music is important to me, and I'm taking a music history course with the person who's actually in the piano, playing the piano in the painting in the book. So that sense of let's just, go someplace else for a minute or two.
Nice. Um, so we've talked about the musicians, but you actually begin the book with the Tolstoys, with Leo Tolstoy and his wife Sophia. Why start there?
I just was reading her diaries, and she was an amateur photographer and took hundreds and hundreds of pictures of them in their life. And they're wonderful photos. So I think that there's some, leaning of the Russian history and that sense of, but also how tortured their relationship was and
Mhm.
how incredibly complicated and sad. And they had a very passionate relationship, and they had 13 children. And
God.
but then at the end, he ran away. He became quite mad and ran away from home and died in the train station. And so, in a bed in the room, but in a train station. And so, he just looms large in great, in literature and in history. And she really was somebody very very strong and very, important in his life. So why did I start with them? I don't know. I was just looking at all these photos and going, okay, I've got to start with them.
Well, and a lot of the artists you talk about their marriages, and then there's also one piece that you write called French Poets, where you basically are addressing the issue of artists who are brilliant but unpleasant or nasty
Sure.
people. Um, how do you navigate that question of that, age-old question of the art versus the artist?
Right. I mean, you can, if you start looking, if you're going to condemn if you're going to judge art by every artist, then you will have no art.
Right.
Everybody's horrible, and to some more degree, less degree, and as times change, maybe things that were acceptable before obviously are not acceptable. But still, you don't even know what kind of awful things people. That's what I said before about the future remorse is that. I think you can't judge, you have to look at the work. And if you're disgusted by an artist, then don't look at the work and don't read the book. I mean, but to remove somebody from history sounds, an artist from history who has achieved a certain level of work that's important, that sounds crazy to me. But, everybody, whatever. It's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I mean, it's obviously a question that is very prominent in our culture right now, but I think about it a lot in terms of, I think about it in terms of like resources and not wanting to impoverish ourselves by removing people who could be resources for good. And also to look, we also learn from things that were bad. So those are
And by the
resources.
way, who's deciding, was Matisse nice to his wife every day of his life? What, I mean,
Right.
who's deciding what the scale is of the crime?
Right.
Anyway, I mean, that's a whole, another conversation, but from my point of view, you have to separate that. I
Right. And in some ways, I think also what in writing about remorse, which is very much about um, acknowledging just the inevitability of human failure. So that is what human experience is. Like no one is going to be
Right.
perfect. And I think that like I think part of the it's like sometimes I think that the urge to throw out people actually comes from a sort of um sorry, my brain is not working that well today. It comes from a very hopeful place that like we want to think that people could be better than they are, and so then we hold people to a higher standard than what is humanly possible. Um, and I think it also comes from wanting things to be simpler, like wanting people to be all good or all bad and not being able to hold that complexity. Um, but maybe when you are willing to reckon with remorse and like live with that kind of element of like there's going to be failure, it makes it easier to not throw people out.
I'm reading Proust for the second time around, and one of the things that we talk about a lot is how how dreadful many of the characters, including the main character, how utterly awful they are, and how thank God that they are awful, because it takes a tremendous amount of courage to look at yourself and to look at the world and go, there's nobody who's, as you say, there's nobody who's going to be exempt from terrible behavior. So it allows you to probably be more accepting of people. I don't know, or maybe not, but at any rate, it's maybe the condemning somebody else isn't as easy if you're aware of the contradictions of humanity.
Hmm. We have a question from Beth about whether you do this reading of these authors in a book club or on your own or through some kind of.
I do the reading of Proust in a book group with a Proustian leader, this wonderful woman, and but the rest of the books I'm on my own. Though we did read Shakespeare together in this group, so
Oh, cool. I haven't seen Shakespeare appear in your work recently, Elise, so maybe that's to come. Um, One of the other things that I thought was really interesting is, I mean, there's always a question about, the reliability of narrators, right? And there's one story of your aunt, you talk about the problem of what you call the truth impasse. Um,
right.
and I was curious about how you think about that question of perspective or reliability and remorse.
Well, I don't think anybody has an accurate representation of anything. And the more you find out, the longer you live and the more you talk to people and compare notes just on a very basic level, everybody's so wildly different in their memory, in their perception, in their so I think that so I also I kept the mistaken about the Jonas Salk, and I thought
That was
that
going to be my next question. Tell us,
it's
explain what you mean
nice
by that.
it's nice to make mistakes, and it's really nice to be stupid once in a while, to make mistakes, to not know. um I find that incredibly refreshing. I can't, if somebody knows everything, you just want to kill them.
Right. And it was a whimsical piece. Like, so in this story that you're telling about your sister, you include this error. You say that penicillin was invented by Jonas Salk, and then you have a footnote that says, of course, it was actually Alexander Fleming, not Jonas Salk, who invented penicillin, and Jonas Salk, of course, invented the polio vaccine. And I thought that that was lovely, right? For the same reasons for the reason you're saying that it's like, yep, you were both saying like, oops, this was wrong, but also, of course, everybody knows that Jonas Salk actually invented penicillin, which I think I mean, invented the polio vaccine, which I think Jews do tend to know because we always like to celebrate the Jews who did the great things. Um, But I like that you kept that in there.
Yeah, I thought it was funny. I mean, humor, obviously, when we come to that, is an important part of the work that I do. And I think that you find it in unexpected places. So
Right. And laughing at oneself is always welcome. Um,
essential.
the one of the other things that you write about some people like Lenin and Stalin and who had no remorse. And you write this is lack of remorse on an epic scale. And of course that leads to the suffering that fuels a lot of the kind of backstory of your family in terms of war and anti-Semitism and the Holocaust and migration and all of those kinds of things. Um, I don't know exactly what my question is. I guess I was thinking about that piece of like, how do we deal, like, if we're talking about remorse as being sort of a basic human ingredient, what do we do with the places where remorse is just bizarrely absent?
Uh,
Which feels, I have to say,
well,
very
like
present in this moment.
very present,
Yeah.
definitely very present. Well, the conversations that my family always had and about, being in Israel and about all of the survivors from the Holocaust and all the tragedies that just swirl around you to this day. And the stories, one story is just more horrific and heartbreaking than the next. And the only thing that you can do is to turn inward and turn to your work and turn to the people that you care for and do the best you can. I mean, there's no fixing the world. There's no like, oh, you know what? I'm going to, I mean, in a way, some people may be able to do, but I'm powerless. And so, I can control my small life to some extent. And so that's what I choose to do. I think that that's the antidote to the incredible, you know, sorrow of what's going on now with with the government and with just that sense of malaise and gloom. So you're propelled into your own work, and that will save you and maybe save the world, but certainly it'll save you.
Right. Well, we each have our own little corner of the work that we need to do. And I think there is a tendency in this moment to be like, I mean, we've been having these conversations at JWA this week, right? Like, oh my God, what should we be doing? What can we do? And I think often the answer is you do what, I mean, there will obviously be moments where we will be called upon to do things that are unlike anything we've had to do before, and that may happen. And we'll be ready for that. But I also think part of what we need to do is do the things that are ours to do, right? Like the things that we do that will be the ways that we each contribute, which don't have to be, there's not one big way. There's like a million little ways that contribute to making, you know, I think for us, for me, it feels like it's about lifting up voices that aren't listened to, bringing in the insights that are on the margins, like helping people understand shared humanity by listening to stories and by recognizing how we are connected and where our stories are part of larger stories, helping people feel like they're part of something, helping people draw strength and resilience from our ancestors. But there's not one way, I guess is what I'm saying. Um, you mentioned Israel, and many of the stories in the book take place there because you're talking about your family. Um, And in this moment, talking about Israel, and especially for writers, can be very fraught. And I'm curious whether that was a concern for you in this book or whether there was any response to that.
I haven't had any response that there hasn't been any response that I know of, and it certainly wasn't an issue. It just that that's the story that I have to tell.
Mhm.
So there it is.
Good. Well, less fraughtness is always
Right.
welcome. Certainly, we hear many other stories that are more fraught. So
Yeah.
glad when that is not the case. Um, so you mentioned that your next projects are on joy and trees. Can you tell us about those and maybe how they relate to if they grew out of this project, how so?
Right. Well, trees, my son and I produced little booklets and one of them was called Trees, in the beginning of the pandemic. And so, trees are just an extraordinary thing. Gardens and trees for me are another antidote to all that goes on in the world. And so, and being in nature and walking is just something that I think is sublime. So that's one project that I'm working on. I'm going to be going to gardens in England and Scotland and France and Italy. And then Joy was kind of like the next step after Remorse. Not that easy to do because you don't want to fall into a saccharine kind of situation. So it's something that I'm interested in now, and I think it's going to be more painting based
Mm.
because I just encounter so many images every day that really do bring me joy and a sense of wonder and a sense of awe and a connection in the most wonderful way to being alive. So, which is a kind of nice goal, I think, for the day. So that's what's happening.
Mm. I
There,
think of so much of your work as being about that, like trying to wrap your mind around like how can we live with both the joy and the things that are beautiful and um, the things that are also painful and horrible that are both there all at the same time.
exactly, and they must be there at the same time.
Right. And there's a line, I can't remember if I wrote it down, but that is a refrain in the book. Um, I thought I wrote it down, but maybe I didn't. That's about like it was a dark time and the birds were singing.
So
And
it's a Mahler, it's from Mahler, Songs from the Earth. And it's dark is life, spring is here, the birds are singing. And that's exactly, if you have to condense it all into three sentences, three lines, that kind of sums it up.
yeah.
So listen to the birds.
Yeah. And I think, and there's also sort of like a back and forth that I remember that you end women holding things by also suggesting like, well, there's holding and there's also letting go, but that's a story for another book. So maybe it's you have this kind of pendulum that you swing back and forth in between different projects too.
Yes. And we'll see what happens after. We
Right.
don't,
Um, I had one more question. What was my last question for you? Um, Oh, there was a question. It was a question in the chat that I didn't ask before. This is a very funny question and kind of a random place to end. But there were some questions about your giraffe blanket on your couch. And I think it's because we were talking about still life. And of course, you have this beautiful room behind you. And it's hard not to look at that room and think of it in some ways as a, different still lifes grouped together. So,
they
uh,
are. It's a different, that fabric I happen to love very much. I bought it in Rome. We lived in Rome when the kids were little for 2 years. And I used to go to the fabric stores and just buy fabric, which I just have around me. So I'm glad somebody noticed. It's a beautiful double-faced wool uh, from Rome. There you go. And the in my room, you can see there are railings. There's nothing nailed to the wall. Everything keeps changing. And probably you could see I love chairs. There are a lot of chairs in here. I love chairs very much. So I like the sense of permanence and also change at the same time.
and stacks of books. And you have this great piece in this book also about there being like a joy to being just surrounded by stacks of books, not in a way which I am often surrounded by stacks of books. And in fact, it's an ongoing joke that the pile on my bedside table is going to
Right.
eventually kill me.
Right.
Um, and I love books. Obviously, you can see I'm surrounded by them in my house. It's our decorating strategy. All walls are covered with books, basically. But I also sometimes feel a little taunted by how many books I have that I haven't yet read, and this sense of like um, intensity around that. And I loved you giving this gift of the idea of there just being joy of having books around. They're not asking anything of you. They're not guilting you about what you haven't read. They're just there as a kind of deliciousness.
Well, it's the Japanese word sundoku. And because I have, millions of books and they're covering everything and the piles just grow. And then sundoku is having stacks of books specifically that you have not read and never will read. But that's fine. It's not, it's not a disgrace. It's a compliment that you just have this these beautiful things in your room to look at and to live with. So if you read them, fine, and if you don't, that's fine too. I mean, you
Yes.
should read Middlemarch, but among other things.
Yes, I did finally read that last year. That was on my embarrassing list of things I hadn't yet read, but and it is wonderful. There was one question that I forgot to ask from Margaret about why you've chosen books as you work in so many different media and why you've chosen books as the way primarily of getting things out there as opposed to like art exhibitions.
Well, I never th thought of myself as an artist. I thought at first I was going to be a writer, and a writer writes books, and then the painting came separately, but then I put them together. And I think that for me, there's nothing better than a book in every way. And I just I've always said they're holy objects or sacred objects, and I kiss my books more than I want to say more than my children, but that's not true. I kiss my children a lot, but that feeling of that's what I think is extraordinary. I vibrate, I resonate to a book, and all the other stuff is interesting and fun, but the books are the center of my life.
Wonderful. Well, we've put some links in the chat and I'll tell people about those in a second, but there was a question about how to reach you. I assume through your website, people can contact you. Um, for Ellie, who's asking about the links in the chat, how we can get them after the program ends, we now put those in the description of the talk when it's on YouTube, so you can look for it there. And those that will be sent, the link to that will be sent tomorrow. But mostly, I just want to say thank you so much, Myra, for being with us tonight. Thank you for giving us this gift of your work. And I'm definitely going to be thinking about Dark is Life. Spring is here. The birds are singing. The birds are not yet singing because it's so freaking cold. But
It will be, they will be.
they
Yeah.
will be. And that juxtaposition of the darkness of life and the cycles of life and joy that are around us, I think paying attention to that dissonance and learning to hold it is going to be really, really important to us in these times. So thank you for helping with that. Thank you for this conversation. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you. It was a pleasure for me too. Thanks, Judith.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all for coming.
Yes, thank you everybody for being here. As always, there's more to discover at JWA. We put some links in the chat. You can watch the conversation that Myra and I had in December of 2020. We have a blog post on our site from 2009 about the series that we mentioned in The Pursuit of Happiness. You can learn more about Jewish women who write graphic narratives, which is not exactly what you do, but sort of. You're mentioned in that article. That's in our encyclopedia. Please, everyone, I hope you will join us next week, same time, same place, for a conversation with Rachel Summerstein on her book, a very different book, Invisible Labor, The Untold Story of the Caesarean Section. Um,
Oh,
you may have also seen that we just opened registration for our new online history course, which begins on February 13th. It's on race, ethnicity, gender, and global Jewish experience. So I hope to see many of you there. And until next time, wishing everybody a good week. Take care, stay warm, stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much.